So we're going to talk about the other end of life, the effects of aging. Of all the things I put up on this screen, this is the most true thing I can put up. As an old guy, I can absolutely tell you that this is absolutely, absolutely true. You know, I feel like an old guy, but I don't feel like an old guy. The big question here is, are we genetically set up with an expiration date where if we don't get hit by a bus, there's a certain point in life where things are going to happen and we're just going to die? Or are we exposed to things that are damaging us over the course of our lifetimes that accumulate and accumulate and accumulate until it's more than we can handle and it kills us? If it's programmed, that's a tricky thing to counteract. If it's accumulated damage, then maybe there's things that we can have some control over. We've talked already about oxygen radicals and how antioxidants keep the oxygen radicals from doing too much damage. But then too many antioxidants are an issue as well. I talked about sugars. How sugars open up and those are reactive and they, like oxygen radicals, react to things. Incidentally, if you're having your blood sugar tested with an A1C, when sugars open up, they stick to hemoglobin and they'll accumulate in your red blood cells, which don't last that long. So if you take a reading of how much glucose is in a little blood sample, it gives you an idea of how much glucose has been on average in the blood over like a 3-month period. But it's not just sticking to your hemoglobin, it's sticking to other things. We talked about telomeres and how the ends of your chromosomes kind of fray over time and we don't repair them properly. And the more frayed they are, the less our cells are willing to make replacement cells when we have damage. And there's aging associated with that. That's something that can be counteracted? Is that it's sort of programmed and sort of not programmed. So this happens in medicine a lot, where there's a big question and you get one group that goes, it's doing this, and there's another group going, no, this is what's happening. And it turns out that the final answer turns out to be a combination of everything. For a while they thought cancer was purely genetic. One group did, somebody thought it was purely ecological, and one group thought that it was actually pathogens. And it turns out all three of those are true. They just needed a broader view and to look closer at it and found out, yes, sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other, sometimes it's the third. An awful lot of the changes of aging have to do with a drop in the amounts of collagen, the flexible protein in your bones. And that's one of the reasons why your bones get more brittle as you get older. They no longer have the flexing ability and you're losing calcium, so they're getting thinner. And they don't have this give to them that they used to have because the collagen levels drop down. Collagen levels is what gives your skin its flexibility. It's the connective tissue holding your skin down. And so your skin isn't as resilient. It folds and it just produces a wrinkle. It produces a firm, permanent fold. And it gets thinner. So your collagen, that layer also is part of your insulation. So your ability to hold heat goes down. Your overall appearance, you tend to get thinner and you can kind of see what's underneath the skin a little bit better. Your arteries. There's collagen that gives your arteries flexibility against the pulse, so there's some rebound There's a little bit of muscle in there. We'll talk about that when we talk about the blood system. But part of the extra push that your arteries give to your pulse comes from collagen, and your arteries lose that flexibility. They call it hardening of the arteries. Your arteries also build up deposits, especially going around corners of the fast-flowing arteries. And those deposits can block blood flow and cause strokes and heart attacks, and the arteries are not as flexible, so your circulation isn't as good. It's harder to get the blood back out of your feet than it was. Your peripheral circulation isn't as useful, so your fingers and feet get colder. All sorts of things connected either indirectly or directly to collagen. Your brain doesn't work as well. Is that, again, unless you've got a real problem, and there's a number of things that can accumulate damage in your brain. Alzheimer's, you accumulate these plaques of proteins that disconnect your cells from one another. And so your brain is going crazy trying to do workarounds, and eventually it runs out of available workarounds. And so you lose connections to a bunch of places in your brain. They kind of randomly turn on and off in people that have that kind of dementia. In Parkinson's, parts of your brain cells actually die, and you lose what those brain cells were doing. But also, it seems like it's almost like we're a computer that's overloaded our memory, where I can't get the word that I want. I can't remember the things that I want to remember. It's in there. It may come out later. Remember that thing you were trying to think of 3 days ago? This is it. But our ability to access and retrieve information is compromised. It gets very frustrating. It's the one thing I don't get from this. When I have classes that I deal with, I always tell them the first day now that I'm going to depend on them. Because what will happen when I'm teaching, and you'll see it happen on the videos too, is that I'll go, okay, brain, I'm ready for this sentence. Are you ready for this sentence? And your brain goes, yeah, boss, we're ready for this sentence. And I'm in the sentence, and I'm 3-4 words in, and I hit the 5th word, and my brain goes, I don't know what that word is anymore. And you go, you told me you knew what the sentence was. He said, well, I thought I knew what the sentence was, but I don't know what that word is anymore. Let's see if we can figure out what the word is. And you get caught on very common words. And with a group of students, I often will go, okay, I've lost the word. What am I looking for here? And they would give it back to me. Take pity on the old guy. But that's part of what happens. Your access gets much more restricted. And I am absolutely convinced that when I was in my 20s, I would occasionally be standing in a room going, why the hell did I come in here? And I wouldn't even pay much attention to it. When you get into your 50s and you do that, you can't help but notice and go, oh my God, my brain is going. Now, I will tell you something. I've heard this many, many times from people who do research in this area. I don't know that I trust it, but they absolutely, positively believe this. So I'm passing it on to you. People who do research on Alzheimer's disease will absolutely tell you, if you're worried that you have Alzheimer's disease, you don't have Alzheimer's disease. Because the changes that Alzheimer's brains go through happens and people don't notice, is that they don't realize that they're losing stuff, I guess. But I've heard it a number of times from a number of different Alzheimer's researchers who are absolutely convinced that it's true. It's hard for me to trust that, when I'm having problems that it's like, oh, well, I'm worried if I'm having Alzheimer's, I guess I don't have Alzheimer's. That's kind of hard to convince yourself of. Another thing that happens with age is you produce less growth hormone. I mean, you're not growing, so it's not a huge surprise. But a number of years ago, let me back up. We used to take growth hormone by sending pituitary glands from cadavers, from corpses, to a lab in Ohio, and they would squish them in like a garlic press, high-tech garlic press. And they would take the juice, and the juice would have growth hormone in it, and that's how you got growth hormone if you were a little kid and you were growth hormone deficient and you needed it. Didn't produce a huge amount of it. So there wasn't a lot of it available. There was barely enough available for the kids. There was not anything available for research. But then we were able to take the gene for human growth hormone and get those fun little bacteria to make it for us. And the supply went way up and people started to do research on it. That's the backstory. So a cardiac researcher, guy working on heart disease, he's looking at all sorts of things that his patients, that he can track in his patients. And he found that the patients that were suffering the worst seemed to have, measurably lower levels of growth hormone than the people that were not suffering that badly. So he thought maybe there's an association with this, and giving people growth hormone will reduce the severity of their cardiovascular problems. So he set up a test. It was a small test with like 13 people in it. And he gave them human growth hormone for like 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, all the stuff that you measure in the cardiac system, nothing had really changed. But they wanted to keep going. They all felt better. They looked better. They looked younger. It turned out that that human growth hormone reversed a lot of the cosmetic changes, the collagen changes, having to do with aging. So their skin was more supple, their muscles felt better, they felt more spry, they had less aches and pains. And there was big, made the papers, Fountain of Youth discovered human growth hormone. And then human growth hormone became a big black market drug. At some point, people decided, well, if it's good for reversing aging, it must be good for athletic performance. I've never, ever seen any studies to indicate that. Now, there may be studies out there I've never seen, but I've never seen studies that human growth hormone will improve your athletic performance. Steroids, anabolic steroids, definitely do that because they build muscle. There was never any question that those could be used for certain types of athletics to increase your performance. But people take human growth hormone, and my inclination is it's a placebo effect. You're taking something, you feel like it's going to do something for you. It's athletic performance. A lot of that is mind over body, and so you perform better. But they've used human growth hormone in a lot of other studies, and they have found that for the most part, it doesn't do anything positive that you can trust, but it does a bunch of negative side effects. So people who are taking it for athletic performance, you got to worry about this. I have a little list here. Is that you're much more likely to retain fluid and have edemas where fluid builds up. Some of this is just weird. Carpal tunnel syndrome is a relatively common side effect of long-term extra human growth hormone. People that are on human growth hormone are more likely to die. Not of any particular thing. They're not more likely to die of a heart attack or more likely to die of cancer. They're just more likely to die in general. They're much more likely to spend more time in intensive care. They're more likely to spend time in a hospital, again, for all sorts of different reasons. Human growth hormone does have kind of widespread effects, so it may be that it kind of diffusely affects different people in different ways that are not necessarily positive. But if you know anybody who's like, hey, I'm going to take some of this human growth hormone and it's going to help me. A few years ago, a linebacker for the Tennessee football team was found to be on human chorionic gonadotropin, the thing that the embryos make that keeps, part of has messages in the female system that tells you you're pregnant, is apparently there are people that are taking that for athletic performance enhancement. I have no idea why anybody would even consider that would work, but there's all sorts of weird things out there that people take. I do want to mention, come back to Alzheimer's a little bit, is that there's still not a great test for Alzheimer's. Is that the plaques that build up in your brain are too microscopic to show up on a scan. There are some scans that they think they can see them with. The scans are getting more and more sensitive, but they're not that reliable. And I think we're still at a point where if you have somebody and you're worried they have Alzheimer's, they run them through a whole bunch of battery of tests. And so there's a long list of things that they could have. And they run a test and go, well, you don't have that, and you don't have this, and you don't have that, and you don't have this. It's basically process of elimination until eventually you're down to the list, and there's only like 4 things on the list, one of which is Alzheimer's, and the other 3 are pretty doggone rare. So they go, yeah, you probably got Alzheimer's. From an evolutionary standpoint, it is perfectly reasonable that things that make us successful early in life, that make us better at surviving and making babies, could have payoff issues later in life and make us die earlier. Once we're beyond our reproductive ages, for most animals, their usefulness is gone, is that they just kind of get out of the way. They can't make babies. They're just using resources that are no good to anybody else. So aging there, in some cases, happens really quickly, like in salmon, where they spawn and they actually, one of your articles talks about this, they actually activate a bunch of stuff and age really quickly and die within like a week. But in humans, it turns out old humans do have some usefulness to the group. And there is such a thing as group selection, a selection of features that support the group for colonial organisms. It's somewhat controversial in evolutionary circles because it's been used for groups to say we're better than that group, so we can, exploit that group and it's fine because we're better than they are. So there's been a big back off of evolution of group selection. You will find people who are evolutionary biologists go, no, group selection doesn't work. But if you think about it, any kind of species that exists as diverse groups, where members of the group kind of support the group as like a giant organism, the features that increase the efficiency of the group are going to be preserved because the group's going to be preserved. And things that don't do so well for the group are more likely to go away. Yeah. Okay, that's it for aging. That's it for this section on reproductive systems. I kind of put this in on the reproductive systems. And then the next system we're going to do is the blood system. We're going to start cellular and then work our way up from little things to big like we've been doing all semester.